Welcome to PR Talk, sponsored by the PRSA of Oregon and part of the MPN, the Marketing Podcast Network. This is your host, Amy Rosenberg, founder of Veracity and author of A Modern Guide to Public Relations. Help other people find our podcast by subscribing, rating, giving us a review, or sharing on social media. Hi, everyone. It's your host, Amy Rosenberg. So every other week, when we're not interviewing a marketing expert, we're playing the audio from one of the videos I recorded to serve as a companion to my book, A Modern Guide to Public Relations, where I attempt to further explain the key takeaways about the practice of PR. If you'd like to watch or listen to all of these in order, please visit prtalk.co, or feel free to peruse at your leisure on here. And of course, the topics are further explained in a modern guide, which is available in print and digitally at the major online booksellers. And I invite your feedback on any of these topics, as this is an evolving and collaborative effort, and we can't all think that we know everything. So happy listening. Hi. So I'm going to be going through little portions of my book, A Modern Guide to Public Relations, Unveiling the Mystery of PR. I kind of forgot that part. Content marketing, SEO, social media, and PR best practices. So we're going to start from the beginning. Don't worry, I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. Okay, I'm just getting organized. So we're going to start with Chapter 1, PR 101. Okay, so what I was trying to say in this part was, what is PR? Because so many people get confused. Well, not really. I mean, us, people who are in the industry don't get confused. But I think that new people might still not know what it is. And I remember when I started my first job, I thought, I want to work with people. And that's what I thought PR was. I didn't really know. So just to kind of break it down, PR stands for public relations. So essentially what that is working with the public. Okay. But there could be a lot of different publics. And so what the publics can vary, and also how you do the relations can vary. And so essentially, I think PR is a conduit from inside an organization to outside of an organization. Or you could look at it like it's a conduit from inside to inside. So inside to inside means you're inside your organization and you're trying to reach people also inside your organization, whether that is staff or shareholders or whatnot. And then the external piece, where you're inside your organization trying to reach the outside, that's the general public, if that's ever really an audience, because oftentimes it's not that broad. And so essentially, I would say that what we think of as classic PR or classic media relations is working with the press. And so that's what a lot of people think about when they hear PR. And that's really what we do. So that's what I do. That's what Veracity does. And that's kind of what you hear a lot of PR people doing when they first come into the industry. Before working with investors, they're not going to be doing that. They're going to be working with the press first. And so I don't necessarily consider the press an audience, really. It's more of a way to reach your audience, or a means to an end, rather. And so that's just something to think about. Even though we're working with the press, of course, your press is your audience, but it's not your ultimate audience. So you're wanting to always think about your ultimate audience. But there's also a lot of different types of PR. So of course, we'll go through that. And then I'm just looking at my notes. Yeah, and I guess the other thing to talk about is how PR is different from marketing. And there's two fundamental ways. Well, first of all, now PR is just ingrained in everything. I mean, maybe it isn't that different than marketing. Maybe PR is marketing. But if you're really looking at classic media relations and you are tying that into advertising, I would say that there are two main differences. That is that PR is free. Ish. Obviously, there's a caveat because you have to either pay your PR team or you have to pay your staff, and your time is never free. but free in the sense that you don't have to purchase an ad, and also free in the sense that you don't have to design an ad, which could free up some time. But then it's also more credible. And so that's huge because a lot of people understand that anybody can buy an ad. Whereas if you get written up in the press, that's harder. And people, believe it or not, still trust what the press says. You know, there's varying opinions on that. And actually the book sort of goes into this, but not really. Just a little quick debrief. But yeah, so it's the two differences. It's free-ish and it's credible-ish, more credible than an ad, possibly, depending on who's writing about you. Thank you. Hi, so we're still in chapter 1 of A Modern Guide to Public Relations. I don't know why I had to look. You'd think I'd remember it, the name. Okay, that's my book. So we are going to talk about what kind of PR person are you going to be? So what we're going to talk about are the different types of PR roles. But what I really meant, and I just don't know if I really said what I meant in here because, I only have so much time. What I meant was like, what kind of PR person are you going to be? Are you going to be a good one or what? And hopefully this whole book is about being a good PR person. And maybe I'll get into what I mean by that because there's actually 3 ways to be a good PR person. I mean, I'm sure there's lots more ways, but I meant of 3 ways. But first we're going to talk about the different types of PR. First of all, you can start in PR, and if you get good PR training and you take it seriously, you can take your PR career with you anywhere, meaning you might not stay in PR, which is fine. A lot of people don't, maybe because it's kind of annoying. If you read this book, you'll understand why it's a little annoying. I was really annoyed as I was editing my own book. It's a lot to PR. But anyway, okay, so different types of PR. Anyway, if you do have good training and you're really great, as I'm sure you are, you can do a lot of different things like lead a company, start a company, HR, different things. Okay, so publicist. This is what I have. Publicist, fancy stereotypes. Meaning this is the stereotypical PR person that they're just like, and publicist means they're just trying to get buzz, but it's what you see in the movies where it's like, oh, I have a star and I'm going to get her on the red carpet. Or I have somebody who just got in trouble and I'm going to, like a star that just got in trouble, not a corporation, and I'm going to go fix it by being sneaky. But that's not, I mean, there are publicists, of course. And maybe we do a little portion of all of this, but that's really not what publicists do, or that's not what PR people do. Of course, there's some publicists, and I think a lot of them are in LA, frankly. I don't know, but I would think so. They're not really here in Portland. Okay, so the next one is B2B. That's business to business. And I called that company communications. That's boring. So that's just what it sounds like. It's somebody who's working with other businesses to promote their own business. And so that means that they are, that the main audience of that business is other businesses. That's how they can sell, is because they're selling to other businesses. And so this role, I kind of think is just a little bit more 9 to 5. Like, that's what I think. We do a lot of B2B PR, and it does seem a little bit more straightforward. And like, we're pretty into work-life flow. And so that's probably why we do a lot of B2B. I mean, that's what it is. Okay, numbers pusher, that's the investor relations. That is kind of, for a public company where you have to connect and communicate with your stockholders. And that's a huge job that can, change based on how the stock prices are doing. And so the audience is the stockholders or other people like like that could influence. The influencers in this one are analysts typically. And so since we don't live in New York, we don't do this kind of work, but we do have people who do, who we could recommend you to if you're interested. The do-gooder, that's community relations. Okay, so we live in Portland. That's what we do. We're good at that. So what we do is, of course, we go do community relations. And that's just going about and trying to get different groups to galvanize with different groups, right? But so that could be a sponsorship, that could be an event, it could be volunteering, it could be a big project, could be going into the school and talking about something, and then we PR it. So a lot of times our client will do the community relations side and then we'll PR it, but sometimes they're not going to do the client relations side, the community relations side, because they just don't or they can't. And so then we come in and do that and then we PR it. So essentially, I like to say that a lot of the great campaigns in PR happen like before you do the PR. And then the PR actually should be easy from there. So the inside agent is the internal relations. That's different than investor relations. So internal, that's speaking with your own staff, and then maybe some really close stakeholders. So partners, agency firms, that kind of thing. And there's a lot you can do with that. I mean, you want to get your staff on the same board, depending on who they are, especially if they're sales agents. Some talking points can be transformed into sales points, all of that. The fire stopper, that's what I call crisis response. And that's what you see, like, that sounds really exciting to me. Like a big crisis. I mean, like a business crisis, not necessarily some movie star. That's what I think of, somebody like flying into DC to fix a problem, but it's not really all like that. Most of the time we work ahead in a crisis, at least I do, because I like to sleep. So we work ahead, but there is a little bit of that crisis response that occurs, even in Portland. And so that one is more like senior level, like super senior level work. The glad hander, that's public affairs. So that's somebody who goes and tries to connect with lobbyists so that they can make moves, make change. So change laws, change policies on behalf of a specific client. And then the mouthpiece, that's the public information officer. And we interviewed one on our podcast. That is Dave Thompson, former PIO of Oregon's Department of Transportation. And he talks about what he does. He does a lot of things besides just being a mouthpiece, but that's kind of an important job to kind of be like rep your company in the press. And then the strategist, ideally everybody's doing a little bit of strategy, especially in PR, but maybe in any job. And so with strategy, I mean, thinking about what you're going to do before you do it, and then possibly reassessing. And so PR has a lot of that, ideally. And ideally, you're working with a big team, and the strategy kind of comes maybe from the leadership, like the more senior people. And then as you get used to working in PR and used to seeing what's done and what's not done, then you can move up to being more strategic. But oftentimes there's just ways to be strategic in everything that you do. That's all I have today. Thank you for joining me on A Modern Guide to Public Relations readings. No, just kidding. I'm not reading it. Why do I have to look at the title every time? I think it's because I have PR talk and then my company and then like clients or I don't have a brain. Okay. Last time we talked, I kind of like did a little teaser without meaning to. It was just that I think I'm a rambler, and that's a problem when you're trying to do short videos. Okay. I had said that there's 3 ways to be a good PR person or an awesome PR person. We don't want to just be good. That's boring. And of course there's more ways, right? But this is my 3 ways. And so last time we were talking about different PR roles. Okay. And so in the beginning of the book, I had kind of outlined them, but then in the part that's the bottom of outlining, I guess that would be the conclusion. I said, since I'm a doer, this book is about doing, because that's what the book is about. It's media relations. So media relations is kind of the classic PR. So press relations, media relations. And so how do you do that? There's rules. I mean, maybe I created some of them, but I have some rules. And then that's easy if you just do the rules. I mean, there's kind of a lot of rules, but okay. So then, but how to be good at it is nothing to do with rules. And of course, you don't always follow rules because we're creatives. And how would you break the glass ceiling if you followed a rule? Okay. So, but the 3 ways to be good at PR are maximization. I always have to think, am I saying that right? Because I always say maximization. Maximization. Shout out to Monique Barton. She created that. I'll talk to you about it in a minute. Okay, maximization, details, tenacity. Okay, so maximization, that's from Monique Barton, who is my boss at Guard Communications in the PR department at the advertising firm called Guard. And she was a big maximizer, but like literally, like we took the Strength Finder test where it talks about your strengths, not your weaknesses. And I think maybe her top strength was maximizer, but you get 5 strengths, and I had strategic as my top strength, but I did have other things like maximizer too, and doer, achiever. That just means that you like to do stuff. Oh my gosh, another tangent. So maximizing is just taking one story and turning it to 20 is my example. And it's not that there's ways to do it that doesn't make it so hard. So it's like taking a press release and then creating a blog post out of it and a social media post and just doing other things with it. You don't just stop at the press release. Or even like you could look at it in a graphics point of view. So taking one graphic, but then creating various other graphics for your branding. Not that I have done that in my Zoom background. Well, we did, but it didn't work for what I was trying to do. Anyway, okay, so the other one is details. Well, maybe I've lost the details part of my strength because I couldn't figure out the Zoom background. It is what it is. But details is kind of huge, especially for PR, kind of unfortunately. So we're not going to be doing like super creative things every day, but it's a mix. It's a mix of doing the details and then doing the cool things. And the details really, really must fall into place or the cool things will not happen, especially when you're working with a lot of people. Whether it's a boss or lots of clients and lots of big teams on client teams, you've got to follow up or whatever it is. And then of course you have to follow up with the press, but oftentimes I see the press isn't really relevant. I'll just say that. Okay. Tenacity. That's another thing. I guess tenacity is kind of the same as what I was saying with details, but because you have to follow up a lot, but I guess details is just remembering to follow up. And then maybe doing it on a system. Whereas tenacity is just not being afraid, and just doing your stuff and getting to it. So like if somebody doesn't email you back, you pick up the phone. I think that's a good way to talk about tenacity. Have a good day.
Thanks for listening. For more PR insight, be sure to check out Amy's book, A Modern Guide to Public Relations, at prtalk.co. Also, please subscribe, rate, or leave us a review.